Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever.
Welcome. As I said in my welcome at lunch, 6 former presidents have agreed to come and share their stories about how they helped to establish and sustain the Faculty Federation. But before we move on to the stories, I would like to take a moment to honor founders and active members who are no longer with us, because I think they deserve our respect as well. From Linden State College, Al Willett was the first president of the Vermont State College Faculty Federation. And according to colleagues, he was the driving force behind establishing the Federation. Yep. David Bradley was a longtime treasurer for the Faculty Federation. Also, I think he was a chapter chair, if I'm not mistaken, as well. But definitely he was the treasurer for years and years and years. Florence Yates was the chapter chair at Linden for years and was instrumental in keeping the chapter active at Linden. At Castleton, Bill Jordan was another president of the Vermont State College's Faculty Federation. Pei-Ing Chang was an active member who inspired others to join the Federation, including myself, by the way. I was influenced by Pei. Andy Rayford and Warren Cook were active members, and Stephen Butterfield served as grievance officer and wrote a manual, this is my understanding, on that role that is still used today. Yep. So their influence lives long beyond their presence in the Federation. At Johnson, George Mercer served both on the bargaining committee and the grievance committee. Paul Gallagher served on several bargaining committees. Eugene Sapadin, I hope I'm pronouncing that, Sapadin, was a longtime grievance officer. And finally, at VTC, John Jackson was an organizer and chapter chair, and Walt Granter was both a founding member and grievance officer. I asked people to share names with me of those who are no longer with us, but I'm sure my list is not complete. Now it's time we hear from the panel of past presidents. You may have noticed there is something that distinguishes me from the rest of this body. Yes, you guessed it, I have more hair. Except I'm told that John Gillen did at one time have way more hair than I. But maybe he'll share that in his story. Before I turn this over to the former presidents, I do want to say that I learned a lot from them. All of them, unfortunately, except for John Duffy, who I just met today, but I'm sure that John Duffy could have helped me with this as well. I met with each and every one of them before I became the president of the Federation, because I really wanted to pick their brain, and they were all very generous in mentoring me, and I do want to thank them for that. I do also want to share some of the wisdom I learned from them. When I met with Roy, he told me not to let the job get me down, because no matter how much good I did, everyone would only remember the bad. He might have been having an Eeyore day that day. Russ Mills always talked about the need to keep an eye on the administration because they spend like drunken sailors. And those of you who know Russ, that is actually a direct quote. John was always upbeat, so I can't say much about what John told me, but my personal favorite was the one that seemed most appropriate once I took the job, and that was what Tim Sturm told me. He said that when you are president, it's like being a leper at a cocktail party. I can only say I'm very happy to be in the presence of these lepers tonight. Ernie Broadwater was much more upbeat, telling me that I was going to do a great job, and it was very encouraging. Now I realize that was just because after 8 years, he was just really, really wanting someone to take over. And so he made it sound maybe a little bit more desirable than it was. In all honesty, it is a pleasure and an honor to serve all of you, and I hope to continue to do so for the next 2 years to the best of my ability.
Well, I wanted to begin in a peculiar way. How's this? A little better? Perfect. Good. Well, I wanted to begin in a peculiar way. It is one of the ways I hope to praise the union for all that it has done in its 4 years. There aren't many of us in the room who were in the system in 1970. I was stunned to learn there's one person in the room who was in the system in 1958. That's unbelievable to me, but it makes me feel good. But in any event, a number of us were here in 1970 and 71 and 72. Wanted just to mention to you the state of faculty rights, faculty progress, the state of the faculty situation back there then. The first comment I wanted to make was the salaries were unbelievably low. They were embarrassingly low, as a matter of fact. My friend Steve Butterfield mentioned to me that some faculty members, in fact, were eligible for food stamps.
Oh my God.
They still are, that's right. I remember reading that. Certainly people in the staff had that eligibility. We had no salary schedule at all. And it was the practice, not always, but sometimes, to hire brand new people in at what older members of the faculty were presently being paid. We had no grievance procedure at all. So in my first year or two at Castleton, we had this president, well-intentioned I'm sure, who just declared that everybody needed to be on campus 40 hours a week. Just declared it. And you couldn't grieve that, you couldn't oppose that. You could fail to do it and hope you weren't caught, but otherwise, that was just the deal. We had no agreed upon standards for reappointment, promotion, and tenure. There was a handbook. I think it was put together by the President's Committee on Promotion and Tenure. I never knew who served on that committee, and I know nobody ever asked me what should be in that handbook. We didn't have access to our personnel files. I find that unbelievable. We couldn't walk in and say, I just want to see what's in my file. They would say, well, you can't do that, John. That's just none of your business. That's our file. And then we didn't have a faculty assemblies. We had what they called a faculty forum. And at the faculty forum, faculty could come, but so could administrators. And whenever there was anything that was really important, the administrators packed the so-called faculty forum, and so it always turned out the way they wanted it to turn out. Oh, me, oh, my. We certainly didn't have the agreement with UVM that enabled our children, should they wish to, and should they were able to attend the University of Vermont tuition-free. We didn't have that. We weren't consulted when it came to the calendar. A semester could be 14 weeks long, could be 15, could be 16, could even be 17, didn't matter. They were just going to tell us how long it was, and we were going to say, oh, that sounds like a great idea. Well, you know, a group of us thought about that, and we said, you know, we really do like the college. We like the students. We think the college has potential. We like Vermont, but we just can't continue to live under this particular set of rules. So we decided that we would form a union. And I have to mention that the first meeting of the so-called unionists at Castleton took place at the home my wife Mary Kay and I happened to be renting at the time. I'm pretty sure it was in February or March of 1972, and Beth Sumner, who's right over there on my right, was one of the people who attended. There were 9 or 10 of us. And we thought about it and we said, yes, we needed a union. And so we looked into various unions. We looked into the AFT, we looked into the AAUP, we looked into the NEA, I think the VSEA, and the more we looked, the more we decided that we really liked the AFT. Well, you know, the spring, our winter gave way to spring, and the spring to summer, and in the fall, we had this really important meeting at VTC, at which members of Johnson, Linden, VTC, and Castleton all came together. And we were going to talk about what it is we were going to do together to form a union. And it turned out that all of the campuses had decided that the union we wanted to support and see if it couldn't become our bargaining agent was the AFT. All of us agreed on that. There were 2 reasons, I think. I have to tell you that, 2 reasons. One is because I think the AFT had the reputation of being more militant than the others. And it was a time, you know, some of us were left over from the 60s. Militancy wasn't a bad idea, so we embraced it. The other reason was, seriously now, the AFT was associated with the AFL-CIO. And we wanted to be associated with the AFL-CIO. So, actually, it was kind of an easy meeting because we all basically agreed on the union. And then, as has been mentioned, we agreed that Al Ouellette, this dynamo from Linden State College, would be the president of our little group, our home bargaining agent. And the rest of us would be organizers. Well, we went about organizing at each of the campuses. And you know, that involved lots of activities. You had to talk to faculty, and some of them were afraid to join a union, and some of them didn't think it was necessary. And then we had to go to the labor board to get straight what the bargaining unit would be. The administration wanted all these administrators in. The union said, no, we don't want them in. Steve Butterfield, who's been gone a long time now, but Steve was so courageous. He would always go to the labor board and argue on our behalf. And then we had to have an election to see if the faculty wanted a union. We had an election, the faculty wanted a union. Then we needed an election to see what the union would be. Lo and behold, it was the AFT. Yay for the AFT, we won. We were the only people really in contention. And then we had to negotiate. Well, Al Millett became the president of the union. His right-hand man was a fellow named Mike Sherbrooke. Mike was kind of a tough guy to deal with sometimes. But he became in many ways the negotiator. Al was the president. And those two faculty members from Linden devoted themselves to the welfare of the faculty for 6 years. They just worked day in and day out. They went to the legislature, seeing if they couldn't get us a raise. They negotiated. They just devoted themselves to it. And they really achieved quite a bit. They did raise our salaries. They did make sure we had faculty assemblies and not faculty forums. It was during their time that the early retirement provision came into the contract. And they did just other things. They at least, we never under Al and Michael, we never really got a salary schedule, but we got a set of ranges. So that, you know, if you're an associate professor, you're going to be someplace in this range. Well, it got to be 1979. Al and Mike, they were exhausted. So we needed to have a new group come in because we had this really hard-nosed chancellor, a guy named Richard Bjork. Some of you know the name, some of you don't. But Dick was a real fighter. He would come to show us that he was the boss. So we put together a really, I thought, really talented, committed, ready-to-roll team. I was the president of that group, but it was almost like being the captain of a football team. All these other players were so talented, and I just got to mention their name. From Castleton, from 1979 to 1983, 84, we had Steve Butterfield. You've heard the name. Talented, knowledgeable, intelligent, courageous, a great guy. We had Bill Keene, who's right in front of me. Bill didn't have his law degree yet, but he still had his lawyer's mind. And he was just so good at pointing out to us how language could be interpreted several ways. It's great to have somebody like that in a negotiating team, let me tell you. We had a woman named Barbara Foley, who was the secretary, who took these fantastic notes. From Linden, we had Florence Yates, and then we had Marv Krupinski, who was our treasurer. I didn't deal with Marv very much in person, but he was just ever so reliable because he watched over our funds, he submitted the funds to yearly audits, and he kept us from really getting so far into the red that it would be hopeless. He was just fantastic. At VTC, we had Walt Granter, Carl Grandin, Mark Correo, John Jackson for a while, and a fellow named Joe Kittle. Great. And then from Johnson, we had John Duffy, we had George Mercer, those two for sure. But these people were really going to fight for us. They really did. So in the 4 or 5 years that I was president, we achieved quite a bit because we had such a strong team and because Al and Mike really did till the field. We just in ways capitalized on their good work. So what did we do? I got to tell you. What are you going to do? In 1980, we had to go to the legislature. We wound up with a 10% raise. A little aside here, Linda said I used to have long hair. She was right, I did. We were going to go to the legislature, and my good friend Walt Granter pulled me aside and said, John, you know, they're never going to give, whatever it was, $500,000 to somebody with hair down to his waist. They're not going to do that, John. So I had a new daughter, and I said, well, I'm looking for a reason to enter the 1980s. This is it. So I got a haircut. I went to the legislature, and what did they do? They gave us the 10% salary increase, just like that. They didn't even have to do anything except say thank you. Then, in 1983, we had to go back to the legislature. Oh, wow. This was a toughie, because Dick Snelling was governor, and he wasn't in love with us. But we went through the legislature, first in the House, then in the Senate, and we wound up, this is fascinating, we wound up with a 12% salary increase for 1980. Got the math one. We had another 12% salary increase for 1982. And if you do the math the way I do, that wound up being a 25% salary increase in 2 years. Well, we were so pleased with ourselves. We said, oh, wow, that doesn't happen often. I have to tell you, just to be honest, the inflation rate was about 10%. But we were still happy. Also, we managed to negotiate a salary schedule. We managed to, oh, this is another thing I have to tell you. We wound up with sabbaticals. All those years we didn't have sabbaticals at our college, but we negotiated sabbaticals. And I just want to say I take a special pride in that because I spent hours of my life arguing with a fellow named Roger Murphy, who was Dick New York's finance man, trying to explain to him that in fact they did have the money for sabbaticals. So now we had sabbaticals for the first time. We were able to see our personnel file for the first time. And then we preserved governance. Dick York wanted to take governance out of the contract. He didn't think faculty should have anything to do with governance. Administrators run institutions, that's what he always used to tell me, not faculty. And I would say, Dick, but you need our advice. He said, no, I don't. And he meant it, he didn't need it. But in any event, we took it to the Vermont Supreme Court and we won. And the court said, yes, you have a right to be consulted when there are academic issues being decided by the president. You have, I guess the way they say it, the cute way was, you have a voice but not a vote. And that was good enough. All we needed was a voice and we could make our points. Now, I still think the faculty assemblies are really important organizations on the campuses because they're a way by which we can make clear what the faculty thinks about what the administration is doing. They may listen, they may not listen, but at least we have an opportunity to say what's on our mind. The last thing I wanted to say was, during my time, what did we do? We agreed on this due structure that I think is still used today. Yeah, I think it's 1% of the gross salary, something like that. We did that because we needed the money. That was back in, say, 82, 83, and it's still in force today. And then we agreed on standards for reappointment, promotion, and tenure, which are in the contract, which are basically what we agreed to 30 or 35 years ago. So we had a really successful 3 or 4 or 5 years because I had such a great team, because of what Al and Michael did. And then at the end of that, almost all of us were exhausted, just exhausted. The VSC was exhausted, we were exhausted, but there was one person who said, well, I'm tired, but I'm not exhausted. And so if we needed somebody to be the president after old John went back to Castleton and stayed there, he would be willing to do it. And that person who came and said, yes, I will be president after the war years, I'll make sure that we not just survive, but we prevail. That person was my buddy, John Duffy. And so why don't you give John a round of applause?
But I had been his vice president for 2 years, his last term. And so I think it was a very good working relationship. I know it was a very good working relationship for me because I learned a great deal from John Gillen. I had come to the faculty in 1979, 80. After 9 years as an academic administrator, they called them dean directors at Johnson State, and I was responsible for the humanities, the arts, and social sciences. So it was a radical shift, and although I had come from a family and a culture in which labor unions were very important for us and for our family's welfare, and had a certain kind of bias at me, I realized that I had to go through a cultural change, and John got me there. It was a great experience. We did frivolous things and we did deep and important things. Frivolous things were like after meeting with one of the central office committees over something, and then the two of us going off to lunch in Burlington and walking down Church Street, and we had just read in the newspaper how the Governor Richard Snelling was so very interested in the destiny of the Lake Champlain sturgeon, a creature under great stress for headed towards extinction. And I said to John, at that point I was also, I think I was chairman of the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Board. I said to John, you want to get on this good side? let's adopt, the Federation adopt the Lake Champlain sturgeon as its icon. So we went up Church Street and down, and on our way down, we decided that it was a great idea, but it wasn't really a great idea. We went on to other things. I think the Federation did accomplish a number, continue to accomplish important actions that remain important to all of you and the rest of our members. And I mentioned two of them today. And one was the sick day bank, which seems like such an obvious thing. And fortunately, the man who was not one of them, he had no fans among us, understood that right away. That is the Chancellor, Richard Bury. And so that worked. It's in the contract, and it still is a working, valuable element of that contract because we all need that backing that provides. Because you can run out of 150 days of your own very quickly with disease, the costs of dealing with ill health and disease. And that was important. And the discipline article also was another, I felt, that the team that accomplished that as a result of not simply sitting down with, across the table from them, but we did have to acquire some assistance from outside, and it included our friends in the governor's office who were helpful, generally helpful, because we had a lobbyist at the time, and who also gave us legal advice, separate from, but slightly different because it dealt with other matters, from what Phil Hoff's office gave us, and Michael Shine principally in that office gave us. And that was Stephen Kimball, the Vermont healthcare plan. Steve was a very valuable advisor to us. I mean, remember how he took me and John during one session when John was president. He took us, he said, listen, there's a big Democratic Party meeting shindig around the corner here in Montpelier. You got to be there. So we went and he stood outside the door and he looked at the two of us and said, okay, you're presentable. We came inside, and he looked and John and I were standing together and he came over and said, spread out. Make the room, get out, get around the room. And so we learned how to schmooze with leaders of the Democratic Party. Wonderful experience for me, and it's something that I look back on with great satisfaction, and I'm especially to see today, and I'm very satisfied to see what a useful looking group this is.
Really?
It seems to me that I go to many meetings and conferences and such, and they all seem to be about things that only white-haired people are interested in. And this has a life and a vitality that is infectious and helpful. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Well, good evening. My name is Tim Sturm, and I'm a professor of education and special education at Linden State College. I served as the VSC Faculty Federation president from 1989 to 1993. Linda mentioned a comment that I made that she remembered. Well, I remember a comment that John Duffy made to me, not to me, but I heard it, and I used it often, and that is when talking to a rather fractious individual faculty member about a contract, John looked at him and said, "You're right. You could negotiate a better contract for you." I was the president from '89 to '93. Prior to that time, I served as the vice president and acting president, while my predecessor, President Holman Bill Jordan, was recovering from emergency heart surgery. So it occurred to me the other night that I'm a member of a rather exclusive club, the President's Club. Doesn't seem like it's a club that people are really struggling to get into. It's a nice club. It's exclusive. So I'd like to suggest that we name the club, and I have a little acronym. It's sort of an acronym. I'd like to call it the Plato Club. Not Plato, as in deep thinker or philosopher, because look at us, I mean, there's no connection there. No, I mean Plato, P-L-A-T-O-W-G, as in President Linda and the old white guy. No era in our union's history has been easy, as the spouses, partners, children, and other loved ones of any president will tell you. 1989 to 93 was no different. When my wife Julie, who's in Florida on a long-planned vacation, learned of this celebration, she grimaced ever so slightly and said, well, and I'm quoting her, well, the union's important, but that was a hard time. She muttered something about, and again I quote, phone calls at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night, and then her voice drifted off. She said no more, and I didn't ask. In 1989, our children were aged 7 and 3. My years as president began at a low point in our history, but ended, I think, pretty well. President Jordan, a truly nice man, had stood at the helm throughout some substantial setbacks. He presided over an initially successful drive to unionize part-time faculty at Castleton, Johnson, Linden, and BTC. These were exhausting battles. They took years. And he and we, the Federation, won an organizing victory at the VLRB. It placed part-time faculty in the full-time bargaining unit. We were going to have one faculty bargaining unit. The VSC appealed that ruling to the Supreme Court, who determined that the part-time faculty could unionize, of course, but could not be in the same bargaining unit as full-time faculty, because we did not share a community of interests. Apparently, we taught different students. The practical result of this ruling was that the Federation was sent back to square one, yet another card-signing drive. Anyone who's been involved in those knows how difficult they are. This time we had to go in support of creating a separate part-time bargaining unit for the part-time faculty bargaining unit. Many in the Federation leadership thought this effort was destined to fail and wasn't worth the effort. So for a while we stalled, and then I became president. President Jordan also presided over the only failed contract ratification vote in our history. A contract was finally hammered out, but morale was pretty low when I became president. It was a hard time. The smartest moves I ever made as president were to call for help. Contract negotiations were then on a 2-year cycle, so we were soon back at the table. And I called the AFT and asked for help in finding a professional negotiator. They sent us Ray Calabrese from the New York State United Teachers. And I can safely say that the VSC administration was not ready for the likes of Ray Calabrese. He was affable, he was intelligent, hardworking, organized, and one savvy negotiator, a consummate professional. He whipped us into shape and he re-energized us. We came into negotiations armed with a clear agenda and the hard data to document our positions. I do remember VSC Counsel Stan Carpenter blinking his eyes a lot, and VSC Chief Negotiator Nick DiGiovanni frequently shuffling his papers and saying, we'll have to get back to you on that. And Ray would say, well, just Nick, you don't know the answer? No, you don't have that data? Write that down. We persisted and we persisted, and we went to fact-finding and arbitration, and we did pretty well. In fact, we did pretty well in both negotiations of my presidency, where we're somewhat like the 2014 Boston Red Sox, from worst to first. Well, almost worst, actually worst to better. But my biggest contribution in all of this was to pick up the phone, call the bullpen, and bring in Rocket Ray Calabrese. We did work with the VSC on one very important thing, and we worked as colleagues in this regard. Although it's in need of a real overhaul, as Linda will tell you, we did in fact work on the first sexual harassment policy to be implemented in the Vermont State Colleges. The AFT Faculty Federation worked with the administration to bring that about, and I remember Roy Vestridge was very active in helping with that. But my most proud accomplishment, our most proud accomplishment, we resuscitated our efforts on behalf of our part-time faculty, sisters and brothers. And once again, my talent, my luck, was in finding people who knew far more than I did and then letting them do their jobs. AFL-CIO organizer Phil Fiermonti led another card-signing petition drive among a group of employees who were often as ephemeral as ghosts. Part-time faculty were often on the road between campuses. It was grinding work, but he and others, among them Vermont AFT Rep. Tom Costello, persisted in the face of a determined VSC anti-organizing campaign. The VSC went on a real charm offensive to try to convince part-timers it was not in their interest to be in a union. We also had to deal with the organized efforts of another union, but we prevailed. And our part-time bargaining unit was almost a reality. The VSC took us to the Supreme Court again. This time they argued that the part-time faculty bargaining unit, which was separate from the full-time bargaining unit, should not be in the same local. It should not have the same chapters, be in the same chapter. It should have elected officers and grievance personnel who were entirely different from the full-time faculty people. We won this time. The Supreme Court would hear none of the VSC's argument. In fact, I do remember Associate Justice Dooley looking at Nick DiGiovanni and saying, "Mr. DiGiovanni, why are you here?" And Nick DiGiovanni gave a Supreme Court level answer, which was, "I wish I could get back to you on that, but I really can't." And the answer was no. The Supreme Court did not like what they had to say. Negotiations began soon thereafter, and Ed Fineff of the New Hampshire AFT, another bright light union stalwart, and his team worked tirelessly for many months before successfully negotiating the first ever VSCFF part-time faculty contract. That was in 1993. In fact, it was a document that I and Chancellor Charles Bunting signed on my last day as president of our beloved union, literally on my last day in office. I was so proud to represent the men and women who made that dream a reality, from former Governor Phil Hoff, who along with his partners argued on our behalf twice before the Vermont Supreme Court. But most important, I was proud of the organizers and the part-time faculty negotiating team members such as Derek Levin of VTC, George Longedecker, who's here, of VTC, and Ray Jeremiah from LSC, and I know I'm not mentioning them all. They were the unsung heroes. They were the real heroes of that entire effort. They never forgot their colleagues like part-time professor of anthropology Mary Ella Squire Hakey, a Rhodes Scholar who taught for many years at Johnson State College, Lyndon State College, and the Community College of Vermont. She taught more credits per academic year than full-time faculty. She taught for a few $100s a credit. She had no benefits, no rights, no job security. The people I've mentioned, they were the ones who never forgot colleagues like her, and it's they who prevailed. So I'll stop here and note that those whom I've named tonight stand in for all the many full-time faculty and part-time faculty who did the Federation's real heavy lifting from 1989 to 93, and they continue. It was a hard time. It's always a hard time. But doesn't the future look just a bit brighter because of our collective efforts? Thank you for your kind attention.
Hi, I'm Russ Mills. As Tim mentioned, his last act as the union president was to sign the first negotiated contract for the part-time faculty, which is a splendid testament to Tim's work. And as the incoming president, part of my job, which I thought was a core responsibility that I had, was to integrate the part-time faculty and the full-time faculty into a coherent and harmonious unit. Even though we had to have separate negotiating teams, one of the ways that happened is that when I ran for president, Derek Levin, who had been, I believe, the lead negotiator for that first contract, ran for vice president. And for a number of years, we maintained that principle, that a member of the part-time faculty union would be vice president. George Longenecker, back when he was a part-time faculty member, was the vice president a couple times, I think, George, is that right? Yeah, a couple terms. And I feel that did help a lot. When we had part-time faculty at the delegate assembly meetings, we had part-time faculty on the executive board, part-time faculty in the top union leadership. And that is a direction that I hope we can recover, because having part-time faculty present at the same leadership meetings, I think, gives a perspective that's highly important and one that we really need to pay attention to. What was that the colleges wanted to have a managed care health plan. Up till that point, we had a so-called indemnity plan. We could go to any doctor you wanted. We had deductibles and co-pays. And it was a very difficult step for us to take, to consider having that other plan. We had them as alternatives. The indemnity plan was more expensive. As I look back, I think that actually was a very beneficial thing for the union, because that brought the college's health insurance costs down to the point where they could consider making a serious negotiation over the total issue of compensation that ultimately, I think, led in part to the salary formula that we have now, which overall I think has been beneficial to us. Sometimes it's been better than other years, but if you look at the averages, we've done all right. And I don't think we could have had that if we'd had that very high-priced health care plan. Although at the time, I had no idea whether we just committed a terrible, terrible blunder. The most unexpected thing that happened when I was the president was when I was told one day that the Vermont State Education Department had a practical nursing program that they were going to just give to Vermont Technical College to administer. I guess they got sick of doing it, I'm not sure why. And so there were all these faculty teaching these nurses around the state who had a contract with the Vermont State Employees Association, and suddenly they were going to come over to us. And as I looked at their contract, I could see there were going to be some problems of making the transition. Our lobbyist at the time, Michael Sirotkin, set me up with various legislators and legislative committees, with the end result that the law that went through the legislature transferred the nursing program over to Vermont Tech, but only under the condition that the college and the VSEA and our union could all agree. And it was the most pleasant negotiating session I have ever had in my life, because if we didn't get a deal, the colleges didn't get what they wanted. And so they were prepared to do what needed to happen to get that nursing program to come over.
Good. All right, I'm Roy Vestridge, for those who don't know. This is going to slide off if I put it any lower, so sorry about that. Yeah, Russ courted me. What he's not telling is, you know those faculty meetings you go to at the beginning of the semester when they elect a chair? And the person usually gets elected, the person who didn't show up at that meeting. Well, I was in teaching the London semester at the time they ran the elections. And I came back, and Russ might have emailed me, "You've been elected president." And so I came back from the London semester and found myself in the midst of negotiations, in a midstream contract negotiation. That's kind of like changing paddles and paddlers and captains midstream, so to speak, and it was a difficult negotiation. The other thing that Russ didn't warn me about was at the time that I had sort of said yes, Charles Bunting was the chancellor, and was, as far as we knew, maybe staying on, and I knew Charles Bunting. He was difficult, but he was a known entity. And he was, generally speaking, a nice guy and intelligent, if we don't always agree with some of the things he did. Well, by the time I got to the table, Bob Clark was now the chancellor. So we had a very different dynamic to suddenly deal with at that point. Like Linda, people gave me advice. John basically said, you'll do a good job, it's important work. John Duffy, I didn't know either, I knew your name. Tim said something to the nature of, you're the equal to the chancellor. Always remember that. And that was actually probably one of the most important pieces of advice I got from an ex-president, because that meant that I sat down with him and we talked as one-to-one as equals. And I wasn't afraid to have dinner with him and go back to my team and talk about what we talked about. But I felt that, if I'm an equal, I will do that. I will not speak for the team, but I will hear what he has to say. And that was important to me. I sometimes took flack from the DA for that. Russ told me lots of things. Russ is by far the person who I would say day to day was my advisor. I think he was serving either as vice president or treasurer or something. I don't remember what role, he'd done so many. And we were in constant contact. But one of the things he did tell me pretty constantly was, people will personally blame you for their low salary. And I found that to be the case. When you go campus to campus. Not everyone, but some people understood it as negotiation, but some people felt that, it was the union's fault, so to speak, and you were the representative. No one told me, and I'll go back to something I believe that Tim said about those late night calls, and I see Bill Doyle still in the back, and during one of these negotiations, I negotiated on 3 contracts, and I was, I guess, the first 3-term president. Bill Doyle, there was an issue, I can't remember what it was specifically, that you were concerned about with your department, and you started calling me at 11 at night on Saturdays and Sundays. And I'm not up that late. I don't know how you were. So we would talk from time to time about the issues there. So the family did play a certain role. So during my tenure, there were certain things that I felt were very important to deal with. One was that as a union, we had done a lot with our own negotiations, with our own contracts. We had a very mature contract by the time I had come in. We had some really difficult battles, and I'm not going to go into specifics of that. We've heard a lot about those during the day. But one of the things that I noticed that we were severely lacking, 2 things really, was one, we didn't have enough concern about our part-timers, so we did a lot of effort in bringing our part-timers into the legislature, doing some activity with kind of lobby days for them, bringing those issues to the forefront. Another thing that we were kind of concerned about was just our lack of public visibility. And so because I'm a communication faculty, because people like Darren Perrin was my former advisee at CAX, the anchor there, head of news. Now, we had a connection to the press, and we started to utilize the press a lot in getting our issues out there, especially when we got to impasse. And it's one of the things I think that, there's a hallmark of my negotiation towards at some point was we were in the news a lot. We had constant articles about us. We brought a lot of pressure on through that. And that was very useful. And the other thing that I would say that was kind of critical was that we didn't have a real connection to the national organization. We had some connection. At that point, there was this thing called the Northern New England Council, which was a group, regional organization where New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont didn't have an AFT state organization anymore. We kind of disbanded that. We all joined together. And it was pretty much being run by the folks out of Concord, New Hampshire, a big school system. And they had the numbers, we could all vote, but they cast one ballot, and it went a different way. When the time I came into my presidency, sometime in '98 or so, that was disbanding, and I was asked by the national office if I would be interested in trying to set up and establish an AFT Vermont. This is the poster right there. And we had at that point just the state colleges, 2 local high schools, a couple of nursing units, small ones. And we had one person on staff in the state of Vermont, down in Little Pearl Street office, doing some organizing, feeling out some stuff in Burlington area. We had a budget of about $70,000 total, and that was mainly his salary. And so I'd come into this organization with some marching orders, build a viable state organization to serve the needs of the state colleges and anything else that happens to come along the way. A few weeks into this new role that I was playing while I was still president of the state colleges, I met with a man, my wife taught at the University of Vermont, named Will Miller. Some of you may know Will Miller. Will Miller was a social activist. He's passed on for now, a Vietnam veteran, very active in Vietnam Veterans Affairs. And he was a faculty member at the University of Vermont and had tried unsuccessfully for many years to build a union there. Came and sat in my office and said, I'd like to try again. Can you help us? We had a long talk, and then I met with some other faculty at the University of Vermont. And I went to the regional office, which was in Rhode Island, a woman by the name of Sandy Nelson. And I said, gee, they'd really like to organize at the University of Vermont. And she looked at me and she said, you're nuts. You're absolutely nuts. There's no way that the faculty at the University of Vermont will organize. And I was thinking from the state college's perspective, it'd be great if our sister institutions would, and we grow as an organization, would help out. So I worked very hard to convince Sandy that this was possible. And we came up with an initial campaign concept, a little bit of a budget, and then they said, but you know, they'll never buy the AFT. So then we decided, well, what will we do? And we met with some people at the AAUP, and eventually we brought Steve Finner from the AAUP, who's sitting back there, up to Vermont, and we decided to do a joint organizing campaign. And we did this campaign. I just want to point out that, you know, the budget for that, I can't remember the specific budget, but it ended up being about close to $1 million campaign by the time we were doing it. $500,000 to start, close to $1 million. And I was in charge of that, which is a strange thing for someone who is a faculty member to suddenly be dealing with this fairly large staff and these responsibilities. I was very much behind the scenes in terms of, not so much in the UVM campaign, but some other campaigns that we dealt with. And we built the state federation, and we actually won the University of Vermont faculty organizing campaign. And that shocked everyone. And that event spearheaded a lot of other organizers we were able to do in the state, which was the Fletcher Allen Nurses, which is another $1 million campaign. We had 13 people on staff for that. And we built an organization, which now Ben Johnson is the president of. It was called the United Professions of Vermont at the time. We grew from, I think we had something like 600 members to 3,000 members by the time I was my 6.5 years as president there. In the time that we were doing that, and Linda sort of asked me to talk more about the state fed than our local, I think we were able to do a lot of services for the state colleges. We brought in Norm Holsinger, an AFT rep, also on the UVM campaign. Norm became our service rep at the state colleges. He and I and Russ basically were the architects, for better or worse, of the formula, which we live with because it was our best option at the time for getting some sort of headway on our contract, on our raises as we went on. So there was a real kind of connection at the national. As part of that, I took my first sabbatical, I think in 2003 it was, or something of that nature, from Castleton after 20 some odd years, or what, 15 years, I get that much, 26 now years there. And during that time, I found myself on 60 different trips around the nation, helping organizing campaigns in Washington State and Florida and all those kinds of places. And this was a movement that was growing. It's fortunate, and I congratulate Ben on the Board of Nurses because it's nice to see there's a movement again, happening here. So, and I think that strengthens our hands totally here. If there is this sense of the labor being active, being viable, being something important in the state, because it was hurting for a while, as we all know, and the recession didn't help us all in that regard. So, I guess that was I see my contribution in many ways as, specific to our contracts, but also as having, in a sense, established to some extent a viable state organization, a healthy state organization, and I'm pleased about that.
And I have to say, in all seriousness, when we went to the legislature in 2004, 2005, this faculty came together. This faculty came together to fight for early retirement. And in addition, the people who were there in Montpelier who were fighting for us were not limited to those who were about to lose early retirement. But there were many, many faculty there, and some of you, I'm sure, were there to help us try to convince the legislature that what we had and what people came on board with us to have was valid. And as you know, we lost some people in that process. Our negotiating team was absolutely tireless. We stayed through some tremendous times. Our team was resourceful. They were creative. They were committed. And I think this is the team that's going forward. I certainly, I know that Linda may have some special feelings for my passing over to her the privilege of joining this team. And as she noted earlier, I believe there was a significant difference in the team, and we're really welcome her, and we're looking forward to your success in the upcoming negotiations. So I think we all owe our newest president a big round of applause.
So, what did we do? We had been rendered voiceless, not only about salaries and other working conditions, but also about academic policies. The VSCFF provided a tool that was needed to turn around the structure and the functioning of the college. Instead of a top-down administrative structure, the Federation sought a grassroots democratic structure. It was literally a revolution. Bylaws for a faculty assembly were adopted, faculty committees and departments were made elective, and due process to investigate grievances was adopted. Fresh air was unleashed throughout the campus, turning the college into a place where discussion and debate was encouraged and not penalized. The VSCFF, by its agreements with the Vermont State Colleges, has given life, purpose, and meaning to our Vermont State Colleges. What a gift. What a legacy. My thanks go out to one and all who helped organize, carry out this mission of the college, to provide the very best education for our students, to encourage them to reach for the stars. We created a faculty voice to assist in this endeavor. And I am so proud to be amongst them. Thank you.
So one story. After we started negotiating, of course, we've all heard about Nick DiGiovanni and how much he gets paid. What amazed me was how unprepared Nick was when he came to negotiations. And I thought, oh, if I came to class this unprepared, where would I be? And I thought, man, we can do this. If they're this unprepared, we can negotiate a contract. And we did. We got the first contract.
Came at a time when my colleague, an economist at Castleton, was doing a statistical study essentially to show that the chief explanatory variable in salaries between men and women was gender rather than any other academic qualification. That finding turned out to be extremely valuable. One of the faculty members at Castleton, a lady by the name of Roberta Hackle, who was in the language department, taught French and French literature, married to an important big shot attorney in Rutland by the name of Don Hackle, who was a very key participant in the Vermont ACLU and who took Roberta's umbrage at being paid way less than a male counterpart at Castleton, said, I'm going to fix them. And they went into federal court. This is in the latter third of the 1970s, very shortly after the Faculty Federation got its imprimatur from the Labor Board, but frankly, separately from the Faculty Federation, which was in a way a good thing, fortuitous thing. It went into federal court and they essentially said, look, this employer is essentially beating up women, faculty members, because they're women. and underpaying them. And here's the evidence. And Alex Azars was his name, did the social studies program with the salary. Coincident with that, of course, the Federation was arguing that it ought to have some more formal rules for distributing salary raises. So very conveniently, but in a way that wasn't representative of some grand strategy, turns out that the ACLU, Roberta Hackle, and that suit got rolled into, if you will, a discussion that the Federation was having during contract negotiations. But the beauty of that was a federal magistrate was sort of overseeing this and insisting that somehow or another this problem be remedied. At the same time, the Federation was negotiating a contract. The beauty of the fact that the judiciary was insisting this be solved is that it took the wind out of the sails of the VSC at the bargaining table. They couldn't exact a price since they had the federal judge to essentially contend with. And the federal judge said, look, you guys go away, you figure out how to fix this problem through negotiations. And as John alluded, we had some real whiz-bang folks. What's his name? Carl Brandon. Carl Brandon from VTC said, you know, I'll figure it out. I'll lay out a model, and that can be your negotiating position. Thank goodness the federal judiciary essentially says, you VSC, you better go fix this, because otherwise I'll fix it for you.
In our hands is placed a power greater than their hoard of gold, greater than the power of armies, magnified 1,000-fold. We can bring to life the new world from the ashes of the old, while the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever.